They laughed at her rifle grip until the colonel whispered the words that froze the entire base. With that grip, you'll be lucky to hit the dirt, not the target. The instructor barked, his laughter echoing across the range. The recruits joined in, some clutching their sides, others pointing at her, the small, quiet woman standing at the firing line. She didn't flinch, didn't blink. Her calm eyes fixed on the steel target 100 meters away. Light revealed a black snake tattoo curling around a bullet beneath her sleeve. The laughter faltered. From behind, a senior officer froze mid-step. His face was drained of color. He whispered under his breath, That's a black viper mark." Her name was Aria Novak, 29 years old, Eastern European, a slight frame, sharp posture, and eyes that never lingered long, as if they'd seen too much already. She'd arrived at Northridge Training Base just 2 weeks prior, a last-minute transfer from an unknown division. No one knew her background, and she never offered it. She just worked, silently, precisely, relentlessly. She cleaned everyone's rifles before dawn. When the others joked or smoked, she studied bullet charts and wind patterns on scrap paper. They called her Ghost Girl, not because she was timid, but because she seemed to drift through training like she wasn't really there. During the first live fire exercise, she didn't raise her rifle once. When asked why, she replied softly, "I'm waiting for the wind to remember my hand." The recruits laughed harder than ever. One even shouted, "You waiting for your ghost buddies to help you aim?" Aria said nothing. She simply brushed a grain of sand off her barrel, eyes still fixed on the horizon, where the wind had just begun to shift. They mocked her silence, until the tattoo under her shirt stopped every heartbeat on the range. The sun hit the range in sharp white streaks, turning the sand into glass. Recruits lined up shoulder to shoulder, rifles slung awkwardly, laughter bouncing off the metal barricades. At the far end stood Nadia Vale. No one knew much about her, just that she was quiet, too quiet. She spoke only when spoken to, and even then her words came out like orders she was used to giving, not taking. "Hey Vale," someone called out. "You sure this isn't your first time touching a real rifle?" The laughter rolled again. Nadia didn't react. She simply continued adjusting her scope, breathing slowly and exactly, like she was aligning more than just metal and glass. Sergeant Halverson, the head instructor, frowned. "You planning to shoot sometime this decade, recruit?" "Yes, sir," she said softly. But she didn't shoot. Not yet. Instead, she looked past the targets, beyond the hills, as if she could see something invisible out there. Her left hand twitched once. Not nervousness, but memory. When she finally lifted the rifle, her posture was flawless. Shoulder tight, cheek pressed to the stock, exhale measured. The rifle wasn't a weapon in her hands. It was an extension, like she'd been born with it. Halverson noticed. So did the colonel, observing from the side rail. Her stillness unsettled people. Because stillness like that doesn't come from beginners. It comes from survivors. She fired once. The sound cracked like thunder, splitting the air. The bullet punched through the bullseye so clean it was almost surgical. The recruits froze. Then someone muttered, "Lucky shot." But Nadia didn't even glance at the target. She was already breaking down the rifle, piece by piece, wiping it clean with an efficiency that made Halverson's throat go dry. Those weren't motions learned in boot camp. They were habits. Old, ingrained, muscle deep. When she finished, she set the rifle down with reverence. Halverson walked over, arms crossed. "Where'd you learn to handle a weapon like that, recruit?" Nadia looked up slowly. "My father taught me," she said. Her tone was even, but her eyes, they carried a silence that wasn't ordinary. "Is your father a hunter?" She paused. "Something like that." That night, while the others in the barracks, she sat alone by the armory, cleaning not just her own rifle, everyone's, checking bolts, polishing barrels, aligning optics. A recruit named Jensen leaned in the doorway. "You know that's not your job, Vale." She didn't look up. "Someone has to make sure they don't jam when it matters." "When what matters?" Her hands stilled. "When someone's life depends on it." Jensen blinked. "You talk like you've seen combat." She said nothing, but her fingers traced the faint mark on her wrist, a small black insignia, barely visible under the skin. A snake coiled around a compass. The symbol was old, almost faded, But Halverson saw it later that evening during inspection. He froze. That tattoo didn't belong to regular recruits. He'd seen it once, years ago, in a debriefing photo labeled Spectre Division, classified. A unit that officially never existed. Vale, he called. Where'd you get that mark? She looked at him, calm and unblinking. A long time ago, sir. That's not an answer. No, she said. It's a warning. The sergeant didn't sleep that night. The next morning, the colonel himself arrived early, something he never did. He stood by the range silently, watching her fire again and again. Each shot is precise, identical grouping, not one wasted bullet. When she stopped, he walked over slowly. Recruit Vale, he said, his voice lower than usual. Your last assignment before this training? Nadia hesitated. The air seemed to thin around her. Maintenance, she replied finally. The colonel studied her face, then the tattoo. His expression changed. Not recognition, but realization. He'd seen that same mark carved on helmets in a photo marked Wraith Unit, Kai Operation Eclipse. Official record, all 12 members deceased. But if that was true, who was standing in front of him now? Nadia met his gaze, calm, almost steady, pitying. Recruit Vale, he said slowly. What does the number 12 mean to you? Her answer came like a whisper through the dust. It's how many ghosts I still carry. Silence fell across the field, and suddenly, no one laughed anymore. Have you ever met someone everyone underestimated, until the truth finally spoke for itself? I've seen it. The moment they learned what Black Viper really meant, every joke died in their throats. Ghosts of the next morning. Clouds rolled in low over the range. The gray that made the desert feel like a memory. Training resumed, but everything was different now. The recruits kept their distance. Even Sergeant Halverson, who once barked in her face, now spoke quieter, as if afraid to wake something ancient inside her.
Nadia didn't notice. Or maybe she didn't care. She performed each drill with mechanical perfection. The wind changed. She adjusted her scope by instinct, a rifle jammed. She fixed it in seconds. She wasn't just following orders. She was reliving them. Vale, Halverson said during break, his voice rough with hesitation. You served before, didn't you? She didn't answer. He tried again. You don't move like a rookie. You breathe like a sniper. Nadia's eyes flicked toward him, and for a second, Nadia didn't notice. Or maybe she didn't care. She performed each drill with mechanical perfection. The wind changed. She adjusted her scope by instinct, a rifle jammed. She fixed it in seconds. She wasn't just following orders. She was reliving them. Vale, Halverson said during break, his voice rough with hesitation. You served before, didn't you? She didn't answer. He tried again. You don't move like a rookie. You breathe like a sniper. Nadia's eyes flicked toward him, and for a second, then you know what happened to them, he pressed. Her reply came slowly. I know what we were told. The mission failed. That everyone died, but you didn't. Nadia exhaled through her nose, quiet and controlled. Sometimes surviving feels worse. Halverson said nothing. There was nothing to say. That night, he looked up the declassified fragments of Operation Eclipse. Most files were blacked out. One line remained readable. Target acquisition compromised team extraction? Negative. Civilian collateral? Unconfirmed. He stared at it for hours, realizing what those words meant. The next day, Colonel Darren called her into his office. He stood by the window, back turned, watching the recruits train in the distance. Recruit Vale, he said without looking. You've attracted quite a bit of attention. Yes, sir. I did some digging. He turned. There was no record of your enlistment before this training cycle. Your file starts blank. Nadia's jaw tightened. Some histories are meant to stay blank, sir. Not when I've got recruits calling you a legend. Legends die faster than soldiers, she said softly. The colonel studied her face for a long time. You were in Wraith, weren't you? Silence. He took a step closer. I saw the tattoo. I've seen the mission patch before. Operation Eclipse was a shadow mission, classified under Ghost Command. Finally, Nadia spoke, her voice low, almost a confession. Eclipse wasn't a mission, she said. It was an execution. The colonel's eyes narrowed. Explain. We were sent in for extraction, 12 operators. Coordinates said it was a rescue of embedded intel officers. But when we arrived, she stopped, her breath catching slightly. The target wasn't an officer. It was a child, 6 years old. The colonel froze. A child? They called her Echo. She was born inside the zone, raised as a code breaker for the other side. We were ordered to eliminate her before the enemy could extract. The room fell silent, the weight of her words pressing against the glass walls. You disobeyed, the colonel guessed quietly. Nadia looked up, and for the first time, there was something raw in her eyes. I refused to kill a child. The mission commander didn't. She swallowed hard. I stopped him. The explosion that followed took the rest. Darren's breath caught. And you? I was buried under 3 meters of concrete, woke up 2 days later, with no unit, no command, and no name. The colonel's face hardened. You realize what you're saying borders on treason. Nadia nodded. Then consider this confession classified, sir. He stared at her, trying to find any hint of deceit. There was none. Finally, he sighed. Go back to training, Vale. But understand this. If even half of what you said is true, they'll come looking. She turned toward the door. They already are, she whispered. That night, the wind howled through the base like a warning. Floodlights flickered, and somewhere beyond the wire fence, unseen eyes were watching. Would you have obeyed orders? Or your conscience? I'd choose the truth.